that results in him losing his head. So let's go ahead and get started, and I'll just make some comments along the way. Uh, I titled this, You Can't Make This Up, or You Can't Make This Stuff Up. Uh, I'll try to give you some background, but you can literally get lost in the relational dynamics of the Herods and the Herod's sons and Herod's dad and the betrayal and the murder. And I'm going to leave some of that, actually, I'm going to leave most of that to your own study. It is fairly fascinating. It's not uncommon in ancient Near Eastern or even modern uh, rulerships or dynasties that there's a lot of political intrigue and even violence and betrayal within families in order to keep power. The saying, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And my desire to hold tight to it causes me to do many things. And we'll see Herod Antipas as our focal point of the royal representative here today. And so we're in Mark chapter 6, verses 14 through 29. And we'll have a reference to the immediate past context as we begin. 14, King Herod, I just need to stop there. This is not actually a king. This isn't someone who's been designated through generations or centuries of royal blood and lineage. This is one among four tetrarchs, that's the root, four rulers that have been given sections of this vassal state of Israel under Rome's control. So Herod is not literally a king. This designation from Mark is a sort of a popular term for a ruler or more elevated than a governor, but not a king as to bloodline or inheritance rights of a throne from generation to generation. So he's a tetrarch, and he was a tetrarch of this northern area from about 4 BC to 39 AD, and then he was banished to he was banished to Gaul, which is like if you don't want to, if there's a worse place to be reassigned to, Gaul. So King Herod heard about this. Now, this is the immediate context where Jesus had now taken his disciples from learners to doers to ministry practitioners, and he had sent them out into the surrounding villages. So these pods of Jesus's power, his ministry through his followers and now his apostles, is going to all these multiplied areas. And so as the ruler of the area, Herod is charged with keeping peace. Rome is looking to him to keep the peace of the area, and there's a lot at stake for these rulers because Rome doesn't want to have to deal with the headaches of insurgencies or uprisings or revolutions. So their job, the ruler's job, the area regional ruler's job, is to be one who examines, investigates, and squashes these things and nips them in the bud, if you will. So King Herod heard about Jesus's ministry and fame expanding, for Jesus' name had become well known. And some were saying, so this is sort of an immediate leap to, okay, this is happening. Who is it that's doing it? Some were saying John the Baptist has been raised from the dead. And this is why miraculous powers are at work in this one, in him, being Jesus. Others said he is Elijah. Uh, and still others claimed he is a prophet, like one of the prophets of long ago. So let's just pause right here and look at these three posited declarations of who this man is that is now being so well known, and he's so potent, he's so powerful. People are coming to him. His teaching is authoritative. They come to him sick and possessed. They leave free. So there's three posited identities. One is John the Baptist has been raised from the dead. So that would indicate that John the Baptist has been killed or has died, And that is actually the balance of our section today. It's almost like one of those shows you're watching where you'll see something mentioned in the present, and then it'll fade into this blurry gob, and then it'll say something like 6 months ago or 2 years ago, and then they'll show you the narrative that previously took place that led up to what you have just experienced in the present time. So when we hear John the Baptist has been raised from the dead, what we're about to do is now dissolve into a narrative very shortly from here that will explain why John the Baptist could possibly have been risen from the dead. And that is who is doing these things in the northern region of Israel. So the first one is John the Baptist, and he's been raised from the dead. The second is Elijah in verse 15. Now, Elijah is this major player in not just Israel's prophetic and spiritual legacy, but also in the national legacy. At the Passover at this time, there is the Passover feast. There is this tradition in the ritual that you save a chair for Elijah, because the expectancy of the nation was that Elijah would come as the forerunner of the one who would rescue Israel, not from her spiritual poverty, but from her national poverty and the oppression that the Romans were imposing upon her as her dominator. So Elijah was expected not necessarily as a spiritual prophetic voice, but a national forerunner for the one who would come and conquer the conquerors and restore Israel to her rightful place. Uh, if you know the very last statement of the very chronologically last book of the Old Testament, the book of Malachi, you will see a statement of prediction where Elijah is seen as this forerunner. And literally, there has not been a voice of a prophet of any kind in Israel until we see John the Baptist himself, and that's why there's these comparisons of John the Baptist and Elijah. So some say John the Baptist is raised from the dead, others say Elijah, and still others claimed he is a prophet like one of the prophets of long ago. So after 400 years of silence that God is not speaking through any prophets, this intertestamental period, as we call it now, looking back from the Old Testament to the New Testament, there has been no voice of a prophet. But now, after 400 years, God is speaking to us through this man and his team that are doing these wonders and these healings and this teaching in the northern region of Israel. So those are the three: John the Baptist, Elijah, or a prophet. Now this is almost an identical triad, a threesome that Jesus asked about for his own posse as he's moving through his ministry in what we see in Matthew 16, where Jesus pauses and says to his closest, says to his team, "Who do men say that I am?" Some say John the Baptist is the answer. Some say Elijah. And some say Jeremiah or one of the prophets. And then Jesus comes back with, and this is a question for all of us, who do you say that I am? And Peter has the right answer. Peter steps right up as usual and imposes himself. Sometimes he has the right answer, sometimes he has the wrong answer. But this is the same triad: John the Baptist, Elijah, or one of the prophets. But when Herod heard these three possibilities, he had already decided. He said, "John, whom I beheaded." So now the plot, the dissolve starts to happen, and the relational spaghetti begins to take shape. But when Herod heard this, he said, "John," referring to John the Baptist, "whom I beheaded, has been raised from the dead." And typically, if you've seen this represented in movies and in stories and some of the great, Easter or Christmas, referring back to the time of Jesus's life, ministry, crucifixion, and resurrection, you'll see Herod portrayed as this kind of spineless uh, insecure man. Now, the insecurity is probably there, but it's not typically expressed in spinelessness and cowardice. Otherwise, he would not be in the position he's in. So this is not, I believe, an attack of conscience. This is okay, I'm stealing up my resolve to now go on another crusade to make sure that my position is protected. That's the insecurity. Because this is a man, and I could get so lost here. What time is it? I can't get so lost here, but I could. I'm going to encourage you to look at the lineage and the progeny, meaning the children, the offspring of Herod the Great, who is this Herod's father. Herod the Great and his sons and his stepsons and his marriages. If you look at a table of all the political and betrayal scenarios that happened from Herod the Great as dad passed down through his sons and what his sons were up to in their political and betrayal profile, and you put it in a table, you put it in like in a graph, and you attach these people together, it looks like a spaghetti bowl. But the goal of the spaghetti is that each individual strand maintains its own power and position or extends power and position. So I can't I can't spend time on this, but I want to encourage you, just take 15 minutes today and and Google Herod the Great and his family. And what you'll see is, after you look around a bit, Caesar Augustus, the emperor of Rome, who knew Herod the Great and knew the legacy of the Herods as the generations then continued Herod the Great's political and betrayal profile, uh, Caesar Augustus said this: it's safer to be a pig in Herod's household than a son. Because if you were a son, now that's where it stopped. Safer to be a pig than a son. This is me. Because if you were a son in this family, you were seen as a threat to the position, the seat of power that was being held by your father. And this is true for several generations in the Herods. So let's now go into what the text tells us is the backstory. We've now dissolved Herod Antipas. That's this one. This Herod is John, whom I beheaded, has come back from the dead. Dissolve. Verse 17. For Herod himself had given orders to have John arrested, and he had him bound and put in prison. He did this, and this is where the story should be investigated. Not because it's not historical, but just some of the details that we don't have here are so intriguing. He did this because of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, whom he had married. So this is thing one. For John had been saying to this Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. So John the Baptist, this picture of prophetic integrity and a call to morality, especially in positions of authority, was and had become a pain. It is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. Verse 19. So Herodias nursed a grudge, the wife, against John and wanted to kill him. But she was not able to because Herod feared John and protected him, knowing him to be a righteous and holy man. So Herod's got this problem. He wants to protect himself and please his wife and make sure his position is secure. But he knows that John is someone to be reckoned with from a spiritual perspective as God's representative. When Herod heard John, he was greatly puzzled, and this word puzzled means that he was captured. He was intrigued. These messages and this power that was obviously not John's own, literally through a lasso. This is the picture here. It just captured him. He was greatly puzzled, yet he liked to listen to him. Finally, the opportune time came, verse 21. On his birthday, Herod gave a banquet for his high officials and military commanders and the leading men of Galilee. When the daughter of Herodias came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his dinner guests. So there's big feast, and part of the entertainment profile is Herodias' daughter, which is not Herod's daughter, it's his stepdaughter. came in and danced. She pleased Herod and his dinner guest. The king said to the girl in his, I don't know if the wine's flowing or, he's just in this festive mood, a combination of wine and festivities, but he's prone to these impetuous statements. Ask ask me for anything you want and I'll give it to you. And so in the hearing of all these guests, and he promised her with an oath, whatever you ask, I will give you up to half my kingdom. So the daughter, Herodias' daughter, went out and said to her mother, what shall I ask for? Herodias answered, the head of John the Baptist. So you see, Herod is hemming himself in all around. At once the girl hurried in to the king with a request. I want you to give me right now the head of John the Baptist on a platter. Verse 26, the king was greatly distressed, but because of his oaths and his dinner guests, he did not want to refuse her. So he immediately sent an executioner with orders to bring John's head. The man went, beheaded John in the prison, and brought back his head on a platter. He presented it to the girl, and she gave it to her mother. Verse 29. On hearing of this, John's disciples came and took his body and laid it in a tomb. Now, these details, as compelling and intriguing as they are, do not do the story of the Herod's justice. So, again, I encourage you to look into this on your own. So here is the death, the ignominious, that means base, dirty, crude, brutal death of this forerunner, this cousin of Jesus, second, third, somewhere. If you know, Elizabeth and Mary were related, and Jesus and John the Baptist were related. And Jesus played the role of Isaiah's prophetic forerunner of Jesus, one who would make low the mountains and bring the valleys up to make straight paths for Jesus, the Messiah's coming into the scene. And he dies at the cruel, crude, powerful, insecure hands of this madman. This is what Jesus says about this madman. Jesus speaking in Luke chapter 13, and Jesus is coming to his own decision point, his own point of no return in his ministry. And as Luke records it, there are some Pharisees, some religious leaders that are becoming more attuned to Jesus' message by this time in his ministry. And he's in Jerusalem. And this will be the place where he is arrested. And Jesus was approached by Pharisees, Luke 13:31. At that time, some Pharisees came to Jesus and said to him, leave this place and go somewhere else. Herod wants to kill you. Jesus replied, and this is a major insult, go tell that fox, I will keep on driving out demons and healing people today and tomorrow, and on the third day I will reach my goal. In any case, I must press on today and tomorrow and the next day. So Jesus is just outside the city and he's moving in to Jerusalem. In any case, I must press on today and tomorrow and the next day, for surely no prophet can die outside of Jerusalem. You go tell that supposed ruler that I will not be dissuaded from my mission. And this is important in a variety of ways, and not the least of which is it reinforces again for us the confidence building notion that God's plan through his son had a very specific timeline, points of geography, and ultimate destinations and outcomes. So that's Jesus on Herod. You go tell that fox. And to call someone a fox literally meant, I don't trust you any further than I can throw you. You've proven yourself to be sly, cunning for your own devices, ruthless and cruel. Now this is Jesus on John the Baptist. Matthew 11. So Jesus had just spoken to John's disciples, and this is as John is in prison, awaiting beheading, and John the Baptist wants to know if he has been the forerunner for the right figure. He says, "Are you the one that was to come, or should we expect another?" So so John tells Jesus through messengers that he needs to know that he has uh, accurately represented God's plan through his pointing to Jesus as the Lamb of God. And as John's disciples were leaving, Jesus began to speak to the crowd about John. "What did you go out into the wilderness to see? A reed swayed by the wind? If not, what did you go out to see? A man dressed in fine clothes?" And we know that's not true. We know that we don't see a reed swayed by the wind. That's the picture of someone who just will go any way the wind blows. No, those who wear fine clothes are in king's palaces. Then what did you go out to see? A prophet? Someone representing God's program, God's message? Yes, I tell you, and more than a prophet. This is the one about whom it was written. And again, this is a validation of the Isaiah prediction that there would be a messenger ahead of Jesus. "I will send my messenger ahead of you, who will prepare your way before you." And here is Jesus' commendation of John. "Truly I tell you, among those born of women, there has not risen anyone greater than John the Baptist. Yet whoever is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he." Now this is so interesting. It speaks to the sequence of God's program through Jesus. But that's for another time. "From the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven has been subjected, or has been moving forward violently. And violent people have been advancing it or have been raiding it, depending on your interpretation. For all the prophets and the law prophesied until John. And if you are willing to accept it, listen carefully, he is the Elijah who was to come." So Jesus is taking all of their questions about his own identity and who John is, and now condensing them into this one summary statement. John is the Elijah figure, and I am the one to whom he was and is pointing. And that's why Jesus says that John has this, for all times, this unique position in God's program as the one to be the messenger, to bring the mountains low, to bring the valleys up, and to make straight the paths for the coming of the Messiah. That's all the time I have. I'm going to close with this. Whenever I read John the Baptist's story, I go to Hebrews chapter 11, which, if you know, starts with faith is the substance of things hoped for and the certainty of things not seen. 11:6 is, without faith, it is impossible to please God. What follows is what I call the Hall of Fame of faith. And it starts with some of the big names we know, and then it goes to people we don't even get their name. And this is where I want to encourage us to be John the Baptist types, that in our normal spheres, in our normal lives, we have a calling to remove the high obstacles to clearly seeing the Messiah, and bring up the deep valleys to make the Messiah, to make Jesus accessible, to smooth his paths, regardless of what it cost us. I know it's so foreign. So in this recitation, in this roster of heroes of the faith, and what more shall I say, the writer to the Hebrews says, I do not even have time to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, and Jephthah, about David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised, who shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames, and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness turned to strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. And here are the other characteristics of the people of faith. Women received back their dead, raised to life again. There were others who were tortured, refusing to be released so that they might gain an even better resurrection. Some faced jeers and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. And this to me is the John the Baptist profile. They were put to death by stoning, and they were sawed in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. And here's the summary statement of all who continue to live by faith and persevere and will not yield. The world was not worthy of them. I mean, I could preach for days on that very statement, because what you see are people who are destitute in the world's eyes, but giants in the eyes of God. In whose eyes do we want to be giants in? The eyes of the world or the eyes of God? All right. Hope you enjoyed this. Remember, 15 minutes on Herod the Great and his lineage. It will not disappoint.